Hey everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. In today's video, we'll be talking about a lot of things. We'll be covering neuroplasticity, human evolution, how we can increase our intelligence, how we can learn more, and increase our level of education. So, this is more of an exploratory episode. In this video, we'll be talking about the what and why, what's going on, what's going well, what's not going well, and why is it going well, and why is it not going well. So, we can kind of have a discussion together. That's the goal of this video, to have a discussion together on what we can do differently. So what I'm really looking for from you all is solutions, ideas. How could we improve conditions across the world? And what can we do to improve both our personal lives for optimized learning, optimized memory retention, optimized understanding, and how can we improve our communities around us, our workplace, and of course, the situation in other parts of the world. Because when we talk about knowledge sharing and knowledge distribution across the world, the picture is not looking very great. There are parts of the world where 99% of the people can read, and there are parts of the world where that number is more down to 30%. So we are in a world that is fundamentally unequal when it comes to fostering knowledge, learning, and intelligence. And with that, we also lack and fail to foster creativity, collaboration, empathy, and a world at peace. Now, I'm going to talk about the neuroscience, I'm going to talk about the neurobiology, I'm going to talk about the psychology of learning, the traits associated with learning, and how we can foster those traits in ourselves and other people. So let's get started. Let's start with what is the state of human evolution 2025? And I've done my research. Okay, there are good things happening here, and there are bad things happening here. It's not a case for everything is going wrong. It is a case of things have been going great, but they're starting to go less great. And why is that happening? And what can we do about it? Because ultimately, we don't want human evolution to plateau. We want human intelligence, human empathy, human creativity to continue to increase. So what are we doing wrong? How are we failing to optimize and draw intelligence from fellow humans and colleagues? Why are we failing to engage our students to think more critically? Why are we failing to get the optimal level of creativity out of them? So let's start with the current picture, literacy. In the 1900s, 20%. In 2025, 87%. And this is, like I said before, not an equal representation of the world. This is an average. In sub-Saharan Africa, the situation is a lot worse. Now let's talk about IQ, a popular metric of fluid or cognitive intelligence. It used to be around 70 in the 1900s. Now it's at 100. It should be clarified here that we continually make our IQ tests more difficult to facilitate for this increase. So in the 1900s, an intelligence test was easier than what it is today. But we can still say that on average, human IQ has increased by at least 30 points. Now, what about knowledge? They said that in 1945, knowledge increased by 2x per year. So knowledge, the amount of total knowledge in the world doubled every year in 1945. In 2025, it doubles in every other month or two. So we are exponentially generating more knowledge and more information today than we ever have. So there is more to learn, more to understand than ever before. Are we able to keep up with that development? Well, first of all, we're more people than ever before. That means that we are more people that can spread out and specialize in different areas. And if we are able to effectively collaborate with each other, that suggests that we should be able to learn and understand more together. So the total output of knowledge You don't have to learn everything that there is to know about the world. You just need to have friends that know and can help fill in your gaps. And if you're able to collaborate effectively with other people, you'll have everything you need to know in order to deal with everyday life problems, decision-making, goal-setting, achievement, and everything around there, right? Now let's talk about empathy. Empathy hit the highest point in the 1970s. That's when it was the highest it's ever been. In the 1980s and on, it drastically dropped. So by 1990, it had fallen, and today, 2025, it has rebounded. So we've seen empathy increase and drastically fall in the 80s and 90s, and we've seen it grow and go back to close to its 1970s point. So we have a lot of empathy and emotional intelligence, and with high empathy and emotional intelligence, it's not just about being able to understand other people better. Sometimes people reduce empathy to this, feeling other people's emotions or something like that. But of course, it's much more than that. Emotional intelligence is the ability to regulate your mood, to not become taken over by your emotions, to not act irrationally, to not be to be able to understand both yourself and your own emotions and other people's emotions, so you can make better decisions, live smarter, and better regulate your attention. A chess player with low empathy will perform worse because they won't be able to deal with loss. They'll throw temper tantrums. They'll be more likely to cheat, and they'll be more likely to give up or lose focus or get distracted if they are suffering from negative mood, while an emotional intelligent chess player will be able to keep playing longer and will find greater joy and satisfaction in playing even when losing than the other player, essentially. So empathy is a very important skill. Thankfully, it's gotten back from its peak, and now the question is, how do we keep going forward? Because without emotional intelligence, we get irrational leaders that make irrational decisions based on emotional impulses. They throw temper tantrums. They are so anxious that they irrationally create threats. They become paranoid. Essentially, we need emotional intelligence to foster peace and transparency and understanding and mutual growth and higher levels of achievement and success in the world today. We need managers, businessmen, colleagues that have emotional intelligence. This is very, very important. What about knowledge sharing? Well, one example of knowledge sharing that's possible today is, of course, because of the internet. And let's say that in the 1960s, of course, nobody has access to the internet. But today, we can talk about 66%. These 66% are people that have the ability to tune in, to listen to podcasts, to learn from other people from all over the world in any language. Simply use Google Translate. You can go and study Chinese people. You can study Spanish people. You can learn from anyone. You have access to an almost infinite amount of knowledge and information. All you have to do is get out of that filter bubble, right? The problem is not everyone has access to the internet, and not everyone has access to all parts of the internet. A lot of people live in areas with censorship and censorship of information. And of course, you need to improve access to the internet across the world, but you also need to teach the people that are on the internet how to use the internet effectively, to not be and have their attention exploited by shitty apps that want your money, want your data, and essentially feed you with the low-effort spam just to keep your mind engaged, but not enough to get you thinking, right? Then we have creativity. What's the situation for creativity? Well, 1990, it was at an all-time high. What happened then? It's been decreasing. The standardization of education, the obsession with PISA tests, the focus on cramming in information and rote learning has led to students underperforming on creative thinking. We are fostering students and kids today that are discouraged, actively discouraged from thinking outside the box because we can't grade that. We can't grade new ideas and innovation. What we're grading is only what we can measure, and we can only measure what we can predict. And because we can't predict creativity, we can't measure it, right? But we can measure creativity using different tests. There are actually tests that track for your ability to think outside the box, to generate ideas, and so on and so forth. So we might want to change how we educate, and we need to do something, because it seems like without creativity, we will foster employees that won't be able to innovate, won't be able to have new ideas, will have bad ideas because they are not able to essentially think outside the box, right? So with this skill, it's anything from your employees being able to save your company time and money because they can think of other ways of doing things, but creativity can also help you think of alternatives to conflicts and to doing unnecessary things. Essentially, creative people can come up with improvements for the world. But we need a culture that rewards creativity, and we need to support it, right? Now let's talk about anxiety. I know nobody wants to talk about anxiety. It's too scary. But anxiety has increased. Anxiety is increasing, especially among young people. You can read Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. It's a very interesting book. You can also look at violence and war across the world. Has decreased, but with what's happening in Ukraine, we're seeing that it's starting to pivot back again, right? So yes, we live in a world with less violence than ever before, but the last years have been a setback to that trend. And we're also seeing more and more countries invest in military. The EU is now talking about a 5% military spending. And this will radically transform how we engage with the world. If we don't have the funding for our universities, for education, for markets, and for trade and economics, we might resort to using bombs and guns and ammunition instead. And that could be a very worrying sign, right, for the future. Now, I'm not saying there can't be reasons to engage in and invest in military short term. I'm just saying that we need to try and find alternative ways whenever possible, right? So, what's good and what's bad? Let's talk about strengths. Let's talk about weaknesses. I think strengths are things like increased empathy. Essentially, the emotional intelligence of today's generation is astounding. Like the ability to regulate your mood and emotions, the psychological skills of today's generations is incredible. Like if you look and talk with the young people today, they are so mature and so wise when it comes to how to deal with negative emotions, with anxiety and fear. So this is a really good thing, and this is a very important skill. It's certainly needed in a time of a lot of turmoil and a lot of worry and a lot of fear, right? Another good point is cognition. Yes, while our intelligence has seemed to decrease in certain countries, on the whole, our intelligence is much higher today than it was in the 1960s or in the 1900s especially. We have significantly increased our level of intelligence and our cognitive skills, right? Then let's talk about peace. The level of peace in the world has been increasing, and the level of democratization was increasing, but it's fallen to a really big low lately. So peace has been something that has been going well and something I think we can feel proud of. Then let's talk about access to knowledge. That's something that has increased significantly, and something we need to be mindful of and wary of. We need to not just have access to knowledge, but we need to have access to high quality knowledge. That means we need in-depth journalism, investigative journalism. We need access to reputable news sources, academia. We need to make sure to remove or try to mitigate paywalls on informative content online, and we need to find ways to fund and support knowledge workers to ensure that knowledge becomes and continues to be hard currency, not shallow, superficial memes, right? Not to say memes can't be funny, but you know what I mean. I would also say that our education has been increasing across the world. People go to school not just more often, but also for longer periods of time, for more years. And every year you stay in school leads to an increase in knowledge, skills, language, capacity, and all kinds of other skills. It might reduce creativity, but that's a problem with the modern education system that we need to fix, right? And then problems, I would say, like many problems that exist are things like misinformation, fake news, and that connects to critical thinking. We, by our schools just cramming down information down our throats from pre-written textbooks and standardized tests, we essentially never teach kids to question anything. And even questioning things can even be seen as a bad thing in school. Students that question things more learn less because they're more resistant to information short term. But of course, critical thinking is essential if you want your employees to build their conclusions and decisions based on accurate information rather than fake news articles, right? So we need the ability to evaluate sources. We need study techniques, we need methodology, right? How do we get information? Where do we get it from? Reduce creativity, we talked about. I would say a decline in social skills. People report higher levels of loneliness, and people seem to struggle more with dealing with social situations. I would say filter bubbles, they also contribute to reduce social skills because you never get to learn to talk with people that are different from you. I would say that, of course, anxiety, attention span decrease. Short form content might reduce your attention span, but most of all, the biggest problem is misplaced or overwhelmed attentions, like when you are being bombarded with multiple forms of information at the same time and you don't have time to process the information, right? So it's very reactive today. We get a news article, react immediately. We don't think, we don't encourage people to think or to take a step back or to just breathe and reflect on what's happened. And we need a shift towards slowing down, essentially learning to improve our ability to digest knowledge, to reflect on knowledge. We need to journal more. Journaling can be a tool to increase your attention and your ability to reflect on and understand information. So you're not just blindly consuming mindlessly, but you're also reflecting on what you're consuming and how it makes you feel. Then we can talk about opportunities. What are the opportunities that are available to us? I would say that if we work from our strengths, what we've got here, right? We could increase access to knowledge, essentially giving everyone around the world access to a free internet, creating more open source, fighting against finding alternatives to copyright, or reducing the time that something is copyrighted. I'd say AI can be a tutor if it's used correctly, but we need to use it correctly. We could very much end up using it badly. I would say investing in art, music, creativity, and creating space for students to engage in the arts to foster creative skills. I'd say more time for kids to play. Kids don't play enough today, and it's a problem. Kids that don't play in schools, they don't learn to bond. It reduces social bonding and connection. Play and recreation also releases endorphins and also gets people more comfortable with rough and tumble play and with dealing with things. They may improve spontaneity, the ability to be adaptable, and play can also increase your ability to experience flow and greater enjoyment in even work situations. That colleagues that are capable of making jokes and seeing humor in things and turning work into play tend to produce more and tend to be more effective. We could work with CEL programs. CEL is essentially emotional intelligence. Basically, in my school, I got access to sit together every Friday with other kids and to talk about our feelings, what happened in the week, when things that made us sad or upset, and how we dealt with that. And we help each other. We give advice. We talk about conflicts that happen within each other's, misunderstandings. And that all fosters empathy and emotional intelligence. Did you know that when we work with CEL programs and emotional intelligence programs in problem areas where there's lots of crime, we reduce crime? Essentially, it's one of the best things we can do in order to prevent youth crime and gang crime. Another part is giving people time for personal projects. Managers that give their employees time to engage with personal projects tend to see more creativity and more innovation in their companies. Google does this famously 20% of the time. There's also the matter of safety. All school environments should feel safe. Equality. Of course, men and women need equal access to these resources, and in many parts of the world, kids and girls are not really allowed to go to school. And not everyone has the same access to this information. and also investing in long-term learning in general. This can mean, for example, employers investing in learning projects for their employees to ensure that, your employees continue learning and increasing their skills. If they only act from their current skills and their current abilities, they will never keep improving and delivering more results. But if you invest in their skills and their competences and in building competences, you'll increase their output long term, right? So we need long-term thinking here. That's probably the number one thing that I see missing, the lack of long-term thinking. I also can imagine things like mentorship programs, partnering globally with different schools to share knowledge, Chinese schools working with Swedish schools, and all of this adding to people talking with each other and finding different ways to think and learning to think in different perspectives. I think of working on study techniques, fostering international partnerships between universities, letting people go to school longer, and, studying at work. So we could set a lot of goals from this. We could increase literacy to 95% by 2030, and imagine what that would lead to if people could read. We could let people go to school for 12 years instead of the current average, which is 8. And we could imagine what that would lead to. We could just imagine what would happen if our students were 10% or 20% more creative than they are today. What could they do with that ability? What kind of businesses could we see? What kind of music, what kind of movies, what kind of arts would we see if we worked with this? We could talk about cell and empathy projects. And if we would increase empathy and emotional intelligence around the world by 10%, how many conflicts would be avoided? How much more wise and empathetic would our leaders be? And if we could get everyone or 80% of the world internet access by 2040, what kind of connections could happen? What kind of opportunities would that create across the world? I think that working with learning and fostering human development across the world and also individually at home is the number one most important project for society. It is the only way out of this current negative trend. It's the only way to come up with smart long-term solutions for climate change and for the environment. It's the only way to drive sustainable innovations. It's the only way to transition our economies. It's the only way to decrease the war and the militarization that's happening across the world. But to do so, we need to understand people more and we need to understand the brain better. Now, this is just meant to be an exploratory video where we talk about what's going on and what could happen next. And in the next videos, I'm going to focus on the why, and I'm going to talk about the brain, and I'm going to talk about neuroplasticity, and I'm going to talk about some things we could shift in our society to transform the world fundamentally. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and see you all in the next video.